Israel Update with Gadi Taub and Mike Duran.
Hello and welcome to Tablet's Israel Update. It's 228 days to the war, the 22nd of May, and it's a Tuesday, and we are both at the headquarters, although not in the same studio. We can't use the studio now, so in separate rooms. Gadi Taub in Washington and Mike Duran. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike Duran in Washington, here at the headquarters. So lovely to have you here, Gadi.
No, I have proof too. So it's been quite a week. Every week is quite a week recently. But this week we had the ICC declaring that the prosecutor declaring that he is going to, or asking the court for arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and against his Minister of Security, Gallant. Gallant was also involved in a, shall we call it, a rebellion against the coalition, and so was Gallant. So Gallants, you can say some say Glantz and Kot, to say the whole trio, which is also considered by some to be the American representatives inside the Israeli cabinet, which, by the way, the Americans have a majority in Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet. And so, Mike, why don't we start with the headlines?
So let's just run through the major events that have happened over the last week, because it's been really an action-packed week, and I think it's what you and I need to do is kind of put it all together into a coherent picture. We had, as you mentioned, Gallant, the Minister of Defense, broke publicly with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the question of the day after in Gaza. Then that's what happened at the beginning of last week, and then he kind of went to a right-wing journalist, Magal, and kind of, it seems to have walked it back. That was my impression, at least, that he walked it back. We'll get your analysis of this in a minute. Then on Saturday night, we had Benny Gantz come out and issue an ultimatum to the prime minister that Gantz, why are you laughing, Gadi? You're laughing
because it looks like I had a different career as a screenwriter, and it all looks like a soap drama in some way. They're doing all this. It's a lot of show and very little content. But yeah.
Okay. So Gantz made an ultimatum, issued an ultimatum, gave 6 conditions that that Prime Minister Netanyahu has to meet before January 8th, or Gantz will leave the coalition. 6 conditions. He said that there needs to be a strategy for winning in the war, and that strategy has to meet those 6 conditions. Then we had Monday morning, as you just mentioned, the news that the ICC is working on warrants for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu, Gallant, and Yahya Sinwar. So I was like, I can't. You're making me laugh.
Why are you laughing?
Because I find it. I know it's actually big news for Israel, and I know that it's very disturbing, but I find it absurd. But anyway, let me continue here to run down the issues we have to talk about. Jake Sullivan, U.S. National Security Advisor, has been in Israel. I think he's leaving today, and he's reportedly very disappointed with Benjamin Netanyahu, particularly on the issue of Saudi normalization. He offered Saudi normalization on a silver platter, and Netanyahu turned it down. So we're being told. We'll discuss this in a minute. And then finally, news broke last week that the Americans have been in quiet negotiations with the Iranians, and led by Brett McGurk. And I think that's actually quite a significant fact. We don't know a lot about it, but
Brett McGurk is the guy who's doing your former job at the White House.
Yeah, he is in charge of the Middle East at the National Security Council at the White House. He's the top Middle East advisor to the president. Without further ado, Gadi, let's start talking about this. And you mentioned Glantz and Cote. Is that what they're calling them?
Yeah.
Glantz and Cote?
Yeah. The three of them, Gallant,
Gantz, and Eisenkot, who is an observer in the War Cabinet. They look like they're all reading off the same the same music. Are they actually coordinating with each other? That's a key question, I think. For me, it's not clear. Do you have a view on that? Are they
absolutely
are Gallant and Gantz actually working hand in glove, or are they competing with each other in some way?
So first of all, they deny that they are working together, which only strengthens the suspicion that they do. And secondly, they've been coordinating with the Americans so often and so much that, you know, if they don't coordinate between themselves directly, they've been coordinating through Blinken or coordinated by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So Gantz made the first step, and from the get-go,
Gallant made
the first step, and from the get-go, I thought it was a misstep, and it was not just me, because if you looked at Gallant's Israeli Twitter, there was an avalanche of anger against Gallant, in which the
calling him a traitor.
And the term traitor was not necessarily the harshest term, and what he seems to be in the tradition of blunt Israeli generals, charmingly honest, as an imitation of Yitzhak Rabin. He seems to not have understood the nuances of the American instructions, if indeed there were such American instructions. Because
say more.
Instead of saying something vague about the day after, instead of complaining that the army can't fight unless it has a political plan to orient itself towards it, if it's the role of the army to orient itself to political goals, it needs to get instructions. But what they were supposed to say, or they said up to now, was that the army was not getting any instructions, so it's just thrashing around. So instead
let me step in here, and just for people who are not following it really closely, I'll describe to everyone what I think the key issue being debated, and then you fill in and tell me whether I got it right or not. The key question is return of a revitalized Palestinian Authority to Gaza, and where Netanyahu is moving, but he doesn't want to say it openly, is he's moving to an Israeli military occupation of Gaza for a year or two. You can't actually defeat Hamas and extirpate it from the Gaza Strip if you don't have a military occupation. But that's a very loaded vision of the future, because if he says that openly, then he's in an open conflict with the Americans, number one. Number two, it opens up the possibility that the right wing in his coalition will start demanding a resumption of settlements in Gaza. Although he has himself, Netanyahu has come out publicly and said there will not be a resumption of settlements, but it could create at least some momentum on the right demands for this. He'd have to keep fighting that fight. And so he prefers to just delay the question, but that's where he's headed, doesn't want to say it.
Yeah, what he does say, yeah, sorry.
So Gallant and Gantz, Eisenkot, what they want is actually they want to work with the Americans to have a revitalized Palestinian Authority. But they can't say that, because that's extremely unpopular with the Israeli electorate. And they are trying to present themselves in some way as being to the right of Netanyahu on some of these war questions for electoral purposes, but they're really working hand in glove with the Americans toward a Palestinian Authority. So what Gallant made the mistake of being too explicit about what he expects to see in Gaza. Is that do I have it right?
Absolutely. And he said, we will need some Palestinian force and it will need to be armed. And the minute he said that, he triggered the Israeli public like no one since the beginning of the war.
That's where the traitor label is about that. Not the fact that he's breaking with Netanyahu, but that he's talking about armed Palestinian force. Is that, do I have that right?
Yes, because when you take, I think I've said this on our program before, when you take Oslo and strip all the dreams of peace and the end of days, what you get is Oslo at heart relied on the idea that we can outsource Israeli security to Palestinian forces. And back in the days of Oslo, Yitzhak Rabin thought it would even be more efficient because he said, Bli Bagatz ve'bli B'Tselem, without the Supreme Court disturbing you with human rights question, and without B'Tselem, which is a radical leftist, now anti-Israeli human rights organization. So he basically thought, you know, Arabs, when they set out to stomp out rebellion, to snuff out a political movement which they don't like, they do it like Arab dictators do, in a bloody way that Israel can never do. So it's not just that the idea of outsourcing security was accepted by Israel. It was actually defended as a good idea by some. After Yasser Arafat came here, the Palestinian Authority established itself, we learned that there is no way that they are going to eliminate terrorism because they participate in terrorism. They have their pay-for-slay program. They compensate terrorists according to the amount of damage that they did to Jews, the number of Jews they caused the death of. And now we also know that the actual security apparatus of the Palestinian Authority, their personnel are moonlighting as terrorists. And not only that, and I've mentioned that too, they brag that they have managed to kill more Jews in Judea and Samaria than Hamas did. So when we talk about, when the press in Israel talks about the collapse of the Conceptia, they try to focus it all on Netanyahu, and then it's all the Qatari money. But when Israelis think of the collapse of the Conceptia, what collapsed for them is Oslo. And what is Oslo if not the outsourcing of Israel's security? And the slogan against Oslo that the right had was, don't give them guns. So here comes Gallant and says he'll give them guns. And if I was Tony Blinken and I understood Israel, suppose I would be both, I would just grab my head and say, oh no, that's the last thing you want to say.
Why didn't Gallant understand this? I'm surprised. He's in the Likud, and he had no sense of this. What do you think was going through his head when he did this?
I think, you know, he's a man of, sociologically, he's part of the IDF brass, and he's steeped in their echo, in their terms, and locked inside their echo chamber. And they keep, and they, I guess they say this at least to each other honestly. And then also Gallant had memory of his own heroic stopping of the reform. So recall that back in March, he was the guy that stopped the reform, and he did it in a way that there was, what stopped the reform is not demonstrations in the streets. We have all this romantic folklore about democracy, participatory democracy, how Israelis went out to the streets to defend their rights and defeated the government, which planned, we are told it's all a lie, a messianic dictatorship led by Smotrich, Ben Gvir, Yariv Levin, Netanyahu, and the ultra-Orthodox. What really happened, it's what really stopped the reform, is a kind of a coup. The army, first of all, the veteran chiefs of the army, some among them went on to be prime ministers. So you had ex-prime ministers fanning the fires of a rebellion, and they said, if there is a constitutional crisis, if this reform goes through, and then the Supreme Court, which was supposed to be reformed, strikes down the reform. What do? That's a constitutional crisis. What should you do? And they kept saying the army should disobey the government and obey the law, by which they meant break the law and side with the court. And Gallant was Minister of Security, and it was his job to stop this rebellion, to nip it in the bud. Instead of doing it, he put himself at the head of this rebellion and crossed the Rubicon into politics. And basically, and he gave this speech in which the acceptance of the terms or the interests of the rebels was couched in terms of security. He said, as Minister of Security, I'm worried about this is becoming a security threat because the army is being torn apart. So instead of doing what you should do when you have a mutiny, putting it down, he said, it's now a danger to security. So that caused the politicians to back down. There was a 64 member coalition out of 120. That's a clear majority, and they buckled under the pressure. And then after Gallant's speech, everybody remembers Gallant Night. Gallant Night was when the demonstrations erupted because Netanyahu's response was to fire Gallant. He declared he would fire Gallant, and then everything erupted. Bonfires on the Ayalon highway, threats of a general strike, greater and greater, shriller and shriller threats of defection from the IDF. And then the next day, Netanyahu retreated and the reform was basically shelved. So Gallant, remember his heroic performance.
So this was his greatest night was when he took an a position independent of Netanyahu, but in doing so, he was representing the security establishment against the prime minister.
Exactly.
And so what you're saying is that he thought he was going to do it again.
Yeah, I'm sure it was in the back of his head because,
I love that interpretation. I bet you're right. I bet you're right.
I looked at his body language, and when he delivered the original speech, he was dead scared, Mike. He stood like a rabbit.
You're talking about the judicial reform?
The
March.
reform. Yeah. And this time he was secure to the point of almost being cocky. It's like he was in his element.
That was
the sequel. That was the sequel.
The sequel. Yeah, he'd seen this movie before. He knew exactly how it was going to go.
And it ended differently. First of all, Netanyahu did not fire him, which he fully expected. I learned from sources familiar with his thinking. So we know this for sure from people close to him, that he thought Netanyahu would fire him on the spot. Netanyahu didn't fall into that trap. I thought he should have, by the way. I don't think you should let your Minister of Defense do such things. But Netanyahu didn't. And then instead of a Gallant night, you look at the Gallant Twitter and you see this barrage of anger. Now, Benny Gantz tweeted immediately his support for Gallant, and then 3 days after that, changed the game entirely. So now tell us about the six conditions, and as you'll see.
This is very interesting what you're saying. I'll tell you the conditions in a second, but just to make sure, and let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying then that Gantz's performance on Saturday night was he's working together with Gallant and he's trying to correct the mistake that Gallant made. Is that what you're saying?
At least they're working for the same goal. And what Gantz did clearly didn't repeat the mistake that Gallant did. And as you rightly noted in the beginning, he tried to position himself to the right of Netanyahu. So what we have in the Gallant speech is Gallant went back to the plan and saying vague terms about the day after. And if you look at it, it's like a babushka in which the Palestinian force, the armed Palestinian force, is hiding somewhere deep inside this doll.
all the Russian
even
dolls.
See it, but it's in there. But it's in.
All right, so Gantz gave 6 conditions to Netanyahu. He said you have to by June 8th, you have to meet 6. You have to put together a strategy to win in the war, and it must meet 6 conditions. Those are: number 1, destroy Hamas; number 2, have Israeli security control. I don't have them written out here, so I'm doing it from memory. You'll help me if I get it wrong. Have Israeli security control over the Gaza Strip. Number 3, put together a international force, a European, Arab, U.S. and Palestinian force to take control, or Palestinian civil authority that will look after all the civil affairs of the Gaza Strip, and prepare the way for a political authority in Gaza that is neither Hamas nor Abbas. So which is where the Palestinian force is being hidden in the babushka is that right? And then
but he also said it will be an international force, American, European, Arab, and Palestinian.
Arab and Palestinian, yes. Then there was normalization with Saudi Arabia. Then there was return all of the displaced people from the northern border, all the Israelis who have been displaced from their homes, return them to their homes by September 1. I'm going to ask you about these dates. It's kind of intriguing. I have a theory about it, but I'm not sure it's correct. And then we have to have a military draft law that will make sure that everyone is serving in the military. That means especially ultra-Orthodox, but also Arabs. And I feel like I'm missing one in there somewhere. Can you think of another one?
Did you say, I was looking for your article, the Gantz ultimatum, because I was going to look at the 6 conditions.
Yeah, I wrote an article in Tablet, and I actually wrote this, so you'd think I'd be able to just reel it off from memory, but my memory is bad. Anyway, we got the gist of it there. There's no way Netanyahu can meet these conditions by January 8th, which is June 8th, 3 weeks from now, which is the deadline. And then we have September 1. So it looked to me like the way I interpret it, and I wrote this article, the Gantz ultimatum for Tablet magazine. I didn't understand what you just said, the relationship between Gallant and Gantz, and how Gallant was reprising his greatest moment from the judicial reform. But the thing that I wrote is that Gantz sees the writing on the wall, and he can see that America is shutting down the war. That's very clear, which means there's not going to be everyone might be returned to their homes, but they're not going to be returned to their homes under conditions of victory, because the Americans won't let the Israelis escalate against Hezbollah in the north. There's not going to be an Arab, European, Palestinian civil authority in Gaza, because the Americans are shutting down the war and making sure that Hamas, by doing so, making sure that Hamas remains a factor in the politics of Gaza. There's no way that an Arab, the UAE, is going to send forces to govern Gaza when they're going to be attacked by Hamas, and maybe attacked by UAE, attacked by Iran for suppressing Hamas. It's not going to happen. So he knows that. He's not an idiot. He understands it. But his dilemma is that he doesn't want to have this lack of victory, or let's say loss in the war. He doesn't want to have responsibility for it. So what he wants to do is he wants to get out of the government before this failure comes, so that he can blame it on Netanyahu. So what he's doing is he's using American support to go against Netanyahu, and ignoring the fact that America is not allowing the Israelis to win. So in other words, if he stays in the government, he has to work with Netanyahu to fight against this American policy, and he loses the support of the Americans. And what he'd rather do is since the Americans since the Biden administration hates Netanyahu, he would prefer to ride you to work in parallel or in cahoots with the Americans to get rid of Netanyahu. Did I explain that very well? I think maybe I wrote it better than I just stated it.
You explained it. You explained it very clearly. I just think that there is another side to this coin, and the other side to this coin, Gantz gained his popularity by getting into this coalition, and as we say in Hebrew, lשים כתף מתחת לאלונקה, to put his shoulder under the stretcher and carry part of the burden. Now, it's very hard to leave a war cabinet in the midst of a war if you don't have a very serious issue. And so if you are portrayed or you are perceived as someone who is doing this for the reasons you lay out that are purely electoral, then that's considered a dirty trick. So leaving the coalition is a double-edged sword. And as a left-wing pundit Nadav Eyal said in Yediot Achronot, the trick is for Gantz to leave the coalition without losing the 10 parliament seats which he has in the polls taken away, that he took from Netanyahu, without them returning to Netanyahu. And this is compared to Yair Lapid, who from the beginning refused to join Netanyahu and kept on banging on his "we have to get rid of this terrible government" drum from the first moment. And Yair Lapid just tanked in the polls. So Gantz relies on this ambiguity for his popularity. And so leaving the coalition is a tricky maneuver. But now comes the ICC. Now,
which makes it harder for him to leave, because he's got.
Of course, because and the Americans keep doing it. How many examples do we have of that, Mike? Since the beginning of this war, they keep doing it. They bring Gantz to the United States.
For examples of it, like you're talking about the sanctioning or threatening to sanction Netzach Yehuda.
That's one example. The other example was when they leaked that they were going to recognize a Palestinian state. Then there was the ammunition.
So in other words, he starts to separate from Netanyahu, and then the Americans do something like designate a military unit as if it's a militia that has no connection to the IDF. From Gantz's point of view, the IDF is a professional army. All parts of it are professional. That he truly believes this, and Israel is a democracy, and it has processes for it when army units misbehave. That happens in every army. There are processes for dealing with it, and for the United States to come in and pretend that there are these rogue units that are not subject to military discipline and so on. That's an insult to the whole state. Every Israeli feels that way. He can't line up with the Americans. He has to call up Antony Blinken and defend the IDF against the Americans. This is what you're talking about, right?
Exactly. And here's another example. They invited him to a visit in the White House, or the State Department. I don't think he met the president. They didn't reach the protocol that far. And that was over and against the objection of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So Gantz goes to America. Yeah. And then the minute he returns, 2 days after, we get the leaks about recognizing a Palestinian state. And what do people say in Israel? They say, oh, Gantz must have had a very good visit. Either he helped them, he advised them to recognize a Palestinian state, or if he insisted on Israel's interest, then they completely disregard him and he has no clout there. So for Gantz, this is very damaging. And now come the ICC. And this is obviously with at least American nods, right? I read in your piece, there's a quote from Blinken saying that it's not unreasonable to think that Israel has breached the rules of war. There was a quote from President Biden who said that Israel was implementing an illegal siege or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And so this
he said that when he said that, I believe, in the interview with Aaron Burnett, when he said he was that's why he was explaining why he was withholding weapons from Israel.
So America is at least nodding its agreement. But even without American agreement, the fact that Israel is attacked unfairly from the outside, what does it create within Israel? People say this kangaroo court is comparing our prime minister fighting for Israel's survival with Yahya Sinwar. And so, of course, Haaretz and the radical left, they write this. They say, oh, the court, I read this in Haaretz today, they're unbelievable. Amir Or, he's a senior, he's a member of the editorial board. And he said, I might be mispronouncing his name. I'll check this in a minute. And he said, well, the court is doing what the international court is doing, what the Israeli court failed to do, and that is convict Netanyahu. So these people are applauding the international court for this ridiculous charge that even CNN, I walked through a lobby yesterday here in Washington. I saw on CNN with the subtitles, because the volume was down, and CNN commentators were saying, this is a ridiculous charge. And they said, this is playing into the hands of Netanyahu, because it enables him to show
it's a ridiculous charge because it's helping Netanyahu.
Yeah. So this causes Benny Gantz and I'm guessing now Yoav Gallant. We haven't spoken of Yoav Gallant. He was rebelling against Netanyahu. Now they're on the way to the same cell.
That was because of course the Khan, the prosecutor from the ICC, said that he's going to indict Gallant as well as Netanyahu. So if this is an American, I mean, I think the American policy, it gives a kind of a green light to the ICC. It's not clear to me that that this was ginned up in any way by the Americans. Who knows? But of course, now the State Department is saying that they will work with Congress to censor the ICC. We'll see what that means. Anyway, if it's an American plot to bring down Netanyahu and to create a pathway by which Gantz can leave the government and look like a patriot rather than an American agent, they're not doing a very good job.
Yeah, no, they're not doing a good job. Amir Oren is the commentator in Haaretz, and the argument was that now, if the prime minister would be barred from leaving Israel, he would be what they call essentially incapacitated. We are
they're gonna whatever happens, they'll find a way to
phrase it in legalese, always in legalese.
This is relebit, right? The first 5 paragraphs of the article don't matter because the final paragraph says, and therefore Netanyahu must resign.
but we have invented a judicial term called essential incapacity. And there's an incapacity clause in our basic law, the executive, as you have for the executive in America. But the incapacity clauses everywhere mean when something happens to the prime minister and he can't function.
When he has a stroke.
Yeah. But what they started floating this idea around in the days of before judicial reform. They said, if Netanyahu is going to be tied up in court, as Donald Trump is, then he'll be essentially incapacitated from performing his duty. And then the Attorney General can decide that he's incapacitated and remove him from office. So these people with their megalomania in our juristocracy and the rule of judges and jurists, they think that an Attorney General can make the decision to remove a sitting prime minister on his own. So now Haaretz is supporting essential incapacity since he can't function if he can't leave the country.
Yeah, this is funny. Let me say a word here about about American policy, because we had Jake Sullivan, who's just finished his trip.
Yeah.
Sullivan said that there's this unbelievable opportunity, Gadi, to create a whole new Middle East by normalization with Saudi Arabia and Israel. I'm glad you're laughing because it's such a fantasy. Essentially what's going on, as I see it, is we've got two American policies. We have a fake policy and a real policy. Let's start with a real policy. The real policy is very simple: stop the war. They want to shut down the war in Gaza. They want to shut down the war with Hezbollah as well. They want to shut down the whole thing, and they want to do it yesterday. The problem the administration has is they keep putting pressure on the Israelis and indicting the Israelis in a lot of ways to justify the pressure that they're putting on them. But the problem they have is that Hamas won't agree to shut down the war. They thought twice now they thought that they had Hamas ready to agree to a long-term ceasefire and exchange of hostages for prisoners, and Hamas hasn't come forward. We talked about that in previous episodes. But this is what that hasn't changed their mind, and if they recognize that the pressure they're putting on the Israelis is actually emboldening Hamas, they're not doing anything about that. Maybe a little bit in that they're allowing the Israelis to carry out a limited incursion into Rafah. But they continue the policy of putting pressure on the Israelis to shut down the war. And they want to do that because they want quiet for the election in November. They want to do that because they want to appeal to their progressive base, for sure. But they also want to do it, according to me, and this, I think my interpretation here is not widely accepted, but maybe increasingly accepted. They have a vision of regional order that requires in which they want to have an understanding, a strategic understanding with Iran. I think this is key, and the fact that Brett McGurk is having these secret conversations in Oman now with the Iranians is all part of this. They want to shut down all of the Houthi activities against international shipping, the war between Hezbollah and Israel, the war in Gaza, the activities of Iran's militias in Iraq and Syria. They want to quiet it all down, and the easiest way for them to do that is to shut down the war. That's the real policy. The fake policy is revitalize Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. This is not going to happen. There's not going to be any revitalized Palestinian Authority because they're trying to shut down the war. If they shut down the war, Hamas remains a factor in the Gaza Strip. We're back to where we were before, coming up with arrangements with Hamas of one sort or another. They're going to put a little Palestinian Authority cover over that, but it's essentially an arrangement with Hamas and an arrangement with Iran. Now, to make it look like there's some kind of grand new, beautiful Arab, European, Palestinian civil affairs thing that Gantz is talking about, they're also talking about this normalization with Saudi Arabia. But the Saudis have two conditions for that Netanyahu has to meet in order to have normalization. Condition number one: stop the war. Condition number two: define an irreversible pathway to a two-state solution. So this is where you're back to your babushka doll, right? With hiding the Palestinian Authority inside the little tiny Palestinian Authority two-state solution, armed Palestinian Authority looking after the security in Gaza. When Gantz says prepare the way for normalization with normalize with Saudi Arabia and prepare the way for this Arab Palestinian force in Gaza that is neither Hamas nor Abbas, he's playing games. He's playing games because we know that he knows that American policy is going to leave Hamas in power, and to the extent it's going to bring in the Palestinian Authority, it's going to be window dressing for Hamas. So he's aligning himself very much with the Americans, but pretending that there's some option out there that Netanyahu is not taking, and Netanyahu's not taking it. Gantz said pretty clearly, he didn't say the names Smotrich and Ben Gvir, but he said on Saturday night that political considerations are influencing Netanyahu, and that an extremist minority, I can't remember, he didn't say messianic minority, maybe just extremist minority, has taken over the ship of state, the bridge of the ship. So that's clearly Smotrich and Ben Gvir. This is what the Israeli press is full of. This is what Jake Sullivan is signaling. That the normalization with Saudi Arabia and this incredible alliance against Iran is waiting for the Israelis if Netanyahu would just break with Smotrich and Ben Gvir. I can't believe the Israeli press this morning, by the way, is full of this. It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. It bothers me greatly. It's not because I am a supporter of Netanyahu. I am a supporter of truth. And the truth is, America is aligning with Iran, and the Israelis just do not want to see it. They don't want to see it. And they'll grab this ridiculous cover story that the administration has created about normalization with Saudi Arabia in order not to see it. And it pains me.
Yeah, and it's hard to fight because the yearning to believe it is just so deep, and the Americans are feeding the Israelis this lie day and night. Two short remarks. One, also to quote your piece, the idea that the evacuees of the north would return by September 1st sounds like a tough demand. In fact, this is a surrender to Hezbollah, because nobody thinks that we can defeat Hezbollah by the September 1st. So Benny Gantz, amidst its tough talk, is actually accepting the American plan of de-escalation in the north under the guise of being tough on Hezbollah. But we should also note, as we promised, the dates. And so 1st of September is one, and the day of the ultimatum, that if the ultimatum expires, he will leave the coalition, is June 8th. And in Israel, the law is that after the Knesset dissolves itself, suppose he can topple the government. It's not clear, because the government has a solid 64 right-wing bloc, which Benny Gantz and his party joined. Their leaving is not going to topple the government, but as you also note in your piece, it's going to undermine its legitimacy, and this can be the beginning of the downfall.
And if Gallant leaves as well, it gets even more difficult. And Gallant also said a month or two ago that if the ultra-Orthodox are not drafted, he will leave.
Yeah,
so that's going to be their trigger, I think.
Yeah, that's their other excuse. And by the way, that's the most dangerous mine. That is the issue that can topple the government, and we should talk about it in one of our next shows in more detail. But note also that the permanent protest, which we now know is coordinating with America, we know because one of the protesters showed off on one of their WhatsApp groups that he is in constant touch with the White House, no less. So
really,
Amidor, yeah, absolutely.
I didn't see that.
Amidor, it was, and Caroline Glick, our friend, reported it on JNS. In detail, he said there's a whole plan, he said, and we are perfectly coordinated with the White House. And their date.
Oh, he's a political genius, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I'm sure, I don't know, if the plan is to get laid, maybe that's a good thing that he did. But I'm not sure that his.
Why? How is that going to help him with his love life?
You know, if you're intimate with the White House, then you're a big shot, aren't you? So does
that work with the Israeli ladies? If you tell them you're,
you know, I haven't had any experience with that. But the date that
asking for a friend. I'm a happily married man.
Permanent protests, the ones who are coordinated with America, also a few weeks back said that the target date is June 9. That's around the same area. And why are they? So this raises a suspicion of coordinate.
Wait, hold on. I didn't totally follow. It's really interesting what you're saying. How are the protests going to resume on June 9? Why June 9?
It has resumed already, but their ultimatum to the Knesset is for the Knesset to dissolve itself by June 9. Now they don't.
Or what will happen?
Nothing. They don't have any leverage. But this is
why did they pick June 9, and when did they do that?
They did it a few weeks back, or even a few, or was it more than 2 months? I'm not sure, but a few weeks back. And why is this interesting, and why does it raise a suspicion? Because they're all aiming at this strange date, and then you ask yourself why. And here's an explanation that's going around in Twitter. The explanation is, in Israel, there's a law that after the Knesset decides to dissolve itself, elections will be held 3 months after that date. 3 months after that date, exactly when the evacuees, Mike, will return to the north.
Okay, now this is
2 months.
This is really interesting what you're saying. I don't want to give false information, but I want to add another layer on this. Sure. This is dangerous because we're getting in conspiracy realm here, and I don't like to. I don't know. Conspiracies do happen. They do happen, but I'm suspicious of them, of the claims that they're happening. But people do make calculations in relation to each other. I'm pretty sure that Jake Sullivan gave an ultimatum to Netanyahu today or yesterday. I got to go back and check it. I didn't pay close attention, but it was about this Saudi normalization stuff. And he said, he gave him like 3 weeks and said, you know, if you don't go down this path toward promising a guaranteed pathway to a Palestinian state, we will have to do a very serious reconsideration of our strategy, and we have the plan B of going without you, and we're going to do that within about 3 weeks. So that's another convergence. If I got that right, I got to go back and check it. I didn't make the connection when I read it this morning.
But the meaning of the date seems to be that a new government, it would be set. Hopefully, hopefully they hope. I don't. A new government would be set by the beginning of September, which is enough to shut down the war, pacify the Middle East, calm down Israeli-American relations in time for the last stretch of the presidential campaign. Absolutely.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind whether there's actually anybody in cahoots here or not, but this is what the Americans want. They want to topple Netanyahu, and they want to get the war finished before the election. And Biden will go to the election saying 3 things. He'll say, I supported Israel against Hamas, and he'll say this is a victory against Hamas. Hamas has been terribly weakened, and Israeli security has been guaranteed, and it's been guaranteed by me. I gave all this support for Israel. That's for the pro-Israel wing of the Democratic Party. To the progressives, he will then say, I toppled Netanyahu. He won't say that in those words, but he'll signal that I was opposed to him and he's gone. And he'll say, and I created a pathway to a Palestinian state. And look at all the advances for Palestine. We have now Spain and Ireland and all these other, Norway have all recognized the Palestinian state. And that happened on my watch. So that's going to be what he wants. That's the plan. That's what he wants to take to the election in November.
Yes. And this brings us to the dumbest take on the news. I have one. Do you?
I didn't. I keep failing you. I'm sorry. I don't have one.
Mine is just so dumb that it will suffice for both of us. And this is from Barak Ravid, your favorite reporter.
Barak Ravid,
the reporter that covers the White House / performs PR for the White House.
He gives cover to the White House.
He gives cover to the White House, and he received a prize from the White House. Since when do journalists receive a prize? The people they're supposed to be covering. So Barak Ravid.
That's journalism today.
Yeah, Barak Ravid and someone for the occasion of Raisi's death, the president of Iran, who died in the helicopter.
Oh, we didn't mention that in the news. We should talk for a couple of seconds about that anyway. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Give me
So actually, I have two. If I can cover for you on the dumb mistake, because one of the dumb mistakes was that someone on Israeli Twitter showed off and said that was not an accident with the chopper. This was I did this, and he signed helicopter, and then Arab media said that there's a guy called Eli in Israel who said he did it. So, but what I meant to say is Barak Ravid, when somebody pulled a tweet of Barak Ravid.
I'm sorry. I used to, when the early days of the internet, when you could leave, when I was leave comments on articles and things, I used to sign them Mashtin Bakir.
In Hebrew.
Yeah, well, in English, I would say Mashtin. Yeah, because it looks like an Arab name, Mashtin Bakir. Like, you don't know.
But for our listeners who don't speak Hebrew, it says pissing on the wall, basically. And you know the Latin for non pissarum contra vindi.
No.
Don't piss against the wind. It's from an Israeli sketch. It's not really Latin, but Israelis know this. Non pissarum contra vindi. So,
right,
but let me finish my dumb mistake. Barak Ravid, on the occasion of the death of Zarif, that was a former Iranian foreign minister. His mother died. Barak Ravid tweeted his condolences. So now that Raisi died, someone on Twitter wrote, "I'm not celebrating until Barak Ravid doesn't express his condolences to the Iranians, because death is not certain until we know from Barak Ravid's condolences." So you wanted to say a few words about Raisi. Let's end with that because we're running out.
Yeah, very quickly. First of all, I did think it was kind of funny that while the search was going on for Raisi and Abdullahian, the foreign minister, this is the only time I can ever remember that everyone in the world was watching a search for in the wreckage, and everybody had their fingers crossed, hoping that they wouldn't find them alive. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. That should
when Amit Segal, your favorite Israeli journalist, reported this first on Twitter, he said, he reported that he's still missing. He said, solemnly, we're all engaged in quiet prayer.
Yeah. Fingers are crossed. Just that we should answer the question, what impact this is going to have. And as all the pundits have been explaining, that this increases the likelihood that Mojtaba Khamenei's son, will become the next supreme leader, because after Khamenei dies, because Raisi was being groomed, but there was a competition between the two, Mojtaba and Khamenei. If you want to think it's a conspiracy theory, I assume that this was just a helicopter crash. If you saw the fog and the terrain and the ages of these helicopters and everything, I think it was just a crash. But if there was a conspiracy, it's probably internal Iranian politics, not the Israelis. As much as the Israelis would like people to believe that they did it, I don't think that they did it. As far as our issues are concerned, war, peace, I don't think it's going to have that much impact, because the policy of Iran toward Gaza, toward all of the Arab countries, is run by the IRGC. So all of the ambassadors in all the Arab countries,
the Revolutionary Guard,
are the Revolutionary Guards, and not Raisi and not Abdullahian. They don't have anything to do with what the Revolutionary Guard does. So I think that we shouldn't expect any real dramatic changes here. There's an interesting question as to whether the switch in the foreign minister and the president will have some effect on these negotiations that were going on with the Americans. Impossible to say, because we don't really know what those negotiations were all about. But that's possible. But as far as the big questions of war and peace, I don't think much changes as a result of this.
So I think we have reached the end of this broadcast, Mike.
Okay, it was a pleasure talking to you. Very interesting analysis on the Gallant and Gantz.
Yeah, I'm hoping to finish sketching it for tablet. I hope I can.
Yeah, please do. This deserves to be written.
I hope I can do it today. So thank you for hosting me at the headquarters of the Hudson Institute here in Washington, D.C., and I'll be heading back to New York this evening. Thank you, Mike, and I'll see you on here next week.
Okay, be good. Bye-bye.